Pour yourself a cold one.
Let's drink them, huh?
And listen to Ross Tucker break down the top college prospects on another tasty edition of the College Draft.
Yeah, it is Daddy Soda time here on the College Draft podcast. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. We are presented by fantasypoints.com. Use that code FEAST, all caps, so that you can go against me and Joe Dolan in our next Best Ball 10 draft. I love fantasy football. I love Best Ball 10s, and I love going against listeners or viewers on our new YouTube page, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, like you. I'm not going to say I'm the greatest fantasy player of all time, but I'm also not going to not say that. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say right there. He's Matt Waldman. He's the star of the show. He's the man with the plan and all the breakdowns. You got to check him out on Twitter, at Matt Waldman, like I do. The rookie scouting portfolio is a thing of absolute beauty, and you can get it mattwaldmanrsp.com, mattwaldmanrsp.com. You guys know the affinity I have for Dane Brugler as well. I've had multiple people tell me that teams buy Dane Brugler's guide and Matt Waldman's guide, and we've got Matt. Matt, I saw you had some type of update or something you posted recently on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I basically, I come out with a newsletter every month from June through December that's a part of that package. And so I was just letting people know that those of you subscribe to the RSP newsletter, it'll be coming out and within the next 10 to 14 days. So that was pretty much the announcement that I had from there.
I love it. I also love, so we're going to dive into running backs today, Matt. And people, if you missed it, we had a whole series where we went over every single draft pick and Matt gave you his thoughts. We did quarterbacks last week. Next week, we'll do wide receivers. Today, though, it is running backs. And I don't know why, Matt, I've always, in my mind, and maybe you told me this, or maybe this is like from 5 years ago at this point, I've always felt like running backs were your greatest strength, your greatest area of expertise. Did I make that up in my head, or is that kind of how you started?
I don't know. It's just kind of what I've heard feedback from a lot of people is that they tend to really like the running back work that I do. And I'd say I'd agree with them that I have affinity for it. I just love the position, actually. So I think that's part of it. And I've had a pretty good track record with guys.
You absolutely have. Let's get into this year's running backs. And it's interesting because there are some really big names out there that have had outstanding years. Travis Etienne from Clemson, Chuba Hubbard from Oklahoma State. Let's start with Etienne, the Clemson star. I still don't really understand, and I'm surprised, if I'm being honest, Matt, that he stayed in school for another year.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised about that too, because this guy was 5'10", 200 pounds. He's a breakaway threat. Maybe it's because he thinks he has potential to add a little more muscle, maybe become a little bit more of a guy that's guaranteed to be a lead runner in the NFL, or at least maybe get that physical body type to do that. But even at 5'10", 200, he doesn't look like he has a frame that's going to gain another 15, 20 pounds. He's probably going to be somewhere between 205, 210. And that means he's more of a committee back or possibly a featured back who runs gap play or from spread, and then they use him from shotgun and pistol and base sets. And despite the fact that maybe he lacks that great size, though, for the position, he breaks a lot of arm tackles. He pushes through contact. He's a momentum-based runner. He's the type of guy that you give him a runway downhill, and he's going to be difficult to knock down without wrapping him up fully and holding on. He's got decent contact balance. He'll work through those indirect hits by linebackers. And when he reaches the secondary, obviously he's got the afterburners, and he reads blocks and anticipates penetration pretty well. But I think that if you want him to be an all-around back where he's going to run both gap and zone, you want to see a little bit more patience with him setting up blocks off tackle or on edge runs like outside zone and toss and counter, where he had some struggles maybe diagnosing when to cut back inside those plays and really about reading some of his keys. But overall, he displays a lot of promise. And I think he's a guy that, as long as he works on his footwork as a pass protector, works on reading some of the keys on outside runs, he has a chance to be one of the top backs coming off the board next year.
What about the aforementioned Hubbard from Oklahoma State, who was in the news this offseason after, Mike Gundy and everything that happened there? It appears they've patched that up. What do you see from Hubbard as a player?
Sometimes the first time you watch a guy, you can have an impression that's different than what you see in subsequent viewings. And my first impression of Hubbard wasn't really strong. And then after watching him more, he's really grown on me because 6'1", 207, great speed. The Oklahoma State runs a lot of lead draw and a lot of edge plays to get him on the perimeter. And so I had some concerns initially about his skills between the tackles because there was just a tendency to bounce plays maybe one gap further than he needed to, or not really setting up the linebackers as well as he could as he got to the, close to the edge, but not necessarily there yet. But I've seen enough of his work inside, some of his willingness to read blocks and find cutback lanes, that he doesn't actually take as many chances as Etienne in a way that he's a little bit more mature at times. So I've become a little bit more optimistic the more I've seen him. He's not a powerful runner who wins, collisions. He's more of a guy that's going to get that great pad level, and he has excellent pad level. I mean, that back's almost flat sometimes when he hits creases, and that really guarantees him opportunities to get a push, to be able to work through reaches and contact. He finds ways to fit through those tight creases because he has really nice feet. I mean, the ability to not only just make some of those dynamic cuts, but some of those smaller footwork maneuvers to be able to anticipate penetration and then find solutions that bounce inside or outside. And I think he picks his way through traffic well. His cut blocking needs a little better consistency. He kind of keeps his head up, doesn't always have his head up. And so as a result of that, he doesn't always see who he's hitting. So you want to see him get a little better as a pass protector, but he's a good receiver. I think he's a guy that you put him in a gap scheme or a scheme that runs a lot of gap and some outside zone. He can be a pretty darn good runner for you, at least as I think as a lead back or a very solid contributor of 10 to 12 touches a game at least.
What about another running back that was in the news from a social justice standpoint this offseason? It seemed like there were a few of them. We mentioned Hubbard. How about Kylan Hill from Mississippi State, who had also mentioned he had concerns with the Mississippi State flag, et cetera, but he's arguably the best player in the state of Mississippi.
Yeah, I mean, he's that guy in that 5'11", 215-pound range, kind of that sweet spot of dimensions that I like a lot for backs, and I think a lot of people do. He can push a pile, he can break tackles, he has that low center of gravity to bounce off hits from linemen and linebackers, and that arrive from kind of glancing shots with him, where if they don't wrap up, he's going to keep going, and he has the burst to reach the secondary, both, on plays between the tackles and on the edge. And he plays with an edge, kind of that ability to throw his body around where he's just kind of on the line between being reckless, but it's generally more aggressive and within just enough control to earn bigger gains as a finisher. He's a really strong finisher as a result of that, even though I don't think he has that extra gear to pull away, maybe for the NFL. In college, you've seen him break away, but I think that he gets run down a little bit more often against, top athletes. Despite the fact that he's got an aggressive streak, I think he's very careful with the football. He's only had one fumble in 473 touches thus far. So that's really good for the college level. And, he has some plays where maybe he tries a little too hard, second or third efforts to try and bounce some plays outside when he sees a crease that maybe he should have took the play as designed, but he sees that opportunity, wants to try a little bit harder, and he ends up losing yards. But coupled with that and some footwork issues, I think he's at his best between the tackles, not trying to do too much. And as a receiver, he tracks the ball over his head. He's a good player. I think he has a chance to raise his profile some. I don't know if he's, a first day or second day pick necessarily, but I think he's one of those guys that if an NFL team gets him in the third or fourth round, they'll tell you that they had a good grade on him and that they were happy with him as a potential contributor.
All right, Matt. Now we're getting into what I'm going to call Ross's row here. All right. It's like fraternity row, Ross's row. The next three guys I know pretty well. I've either called their games or met them or whatever. And it's just interesting. Matt, just to peel back the curtain a little bit, always sends me a list of guys, the position that we want to make sure we hit. And you have them right here in order: Journey Brown, Najee Harris, Jarrett Patterson. I know all three of these guys pretty well for various reasons. Let's start with Journey Brown. Matt, I mentioned Dane Brugler earlier in the show. I think it's interesting that the Athletics college draft guy had Journey Brown as the number one ranked running back coming into the season. And so what I can tell you about him, and just some background that you probably don't know, Matt, I don't even think Dane knows, but just I live in Pennsylvania. I follow Penn State football. So first of all, he's from Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is absolutely middle of nowhere. And he was very, very lightly recruited, which is bizarre because he broke the state record in the 100 meters. Leroy Burrell, like Olympic gold medal, Leroy Burrell. Journey Brown beat his time in the 100 with a 10.43 and won back-to-back state championships. But I think there might have been, I don't know, Matt, if there was academic issues or what, or just because he was from such a small town, but he wasn't a national recruit. He didn't have a lot of those scholarships. And when you watched his high school highlight video, you could kind of tell why. It was like he just was faster than everybody else, but you didn't really see a lot of wiggle. You didn't really see a lot of power. It was such a small conference that he would kind of like take the ball and run all the way around the outside like you do in 7th grade, and you can score touchdowns that way. It was kind of funny to watch. He was extremely raw, which is why what Penn State's done with him the last few years. I mean, the first year he redshirted. Then the next year he really just returned kicks. It wasn't until this past year, his 3rd year, where they actually gave him some touches. And they didn't even really give him the lion's share of the touches till the last 5 or 6 games. He was in a 4-man rotation with Ricky Slade and a couple of true freshmen and Devin Ford and Noah Kane, who are both pretty good. But what jumps out to me about him is he's gotten so much better. And what is crazy, Matt, for a guy that ran a 10.43 in 100, you might be most impressed by his power. I mean, he has runs where he knocks over 3 dudes, or he carries a guy like 6 yards. Like, he has rare power. We talked about the speed. I really think he's still, and you study him more than I do, I really think he's still kind of figuring out how to be a runner, like where to go and how to have a feel. But in terms of physical ability, between the power, the balance, and the speed, I mean, he's off the charts.
Yeah, he's one of the most fascinating backs in this class because, like you said, like I didn't know his track background yet. I just watched the tape first, so I haven't really looked back into his background yet. But the first thing I thought was, this is a guy who's got like the legs of a defensive end and the upper body of a wide receiver. Like, he's still filling in to his frame. And when you see that, and he's 216 pounds, at least that's what he's listed as, and you're looking at the legs of like a 240 pounder and you're looking at the upper body of a 200 pounder. And I'm going, kind of makes sense if he's that weight. He's a long strider, kind of a gliding back who covers more ground than you might expect if you didn't know about his track background, until he bounces outside. And then you see the speed like very apparent when he gets into the secondary and he just starts blowing away defensive backs. But like you said, strong enough to pull through reaches and wraps against box defenders. He doesn't lose significant speed with that stride when he gets through contact either, which is what really kind of blows me away about him. And he has soft hands. I think he works through traffic with pretty good pacing and footwork right now. Just, you can see that what he knows how to do, I think he processes what he sees pretty well for a guy who's still developing. And he has that skill that the really good backs have, like guys like Adrian Peterson. Ryan Matthews was a great back out of Fresno State. he didn't put it together as well as he might have been able to in the NFL. And some of that I know had to do with work, the willingness to do the work in the off season. Matt Forte was a terrific back. All three of those guys, once they got to the second level, they could plant their foot in the ground against a linebacker or a safety and just completely change the axis of pursuit that the defense had. And they're off for another 40 or 50 yards. And Journey Brown has that skill. He can turn a 15-yard gain to a 75-yard play. And he reminds me, I think, of what people expected out of Tevin Coleman, out of Darren McFadden, as guys who I think were hit or miss as outside zone runners and better suited as gap players in the NFL. I think this is a guy that can become a competent zone guy. He has the feet and the pad level to make the transition that neither of those guys really had. Like, they drop the pads, their head goes down, they get hit, they hit the ground. Journey Brown, man, the way he runs, it's almost like he's got that bend and lean that's so good. And like I say, he's just got to grow into his frame, which is just crazy that he's this good. And he still looks like someone who's kind of growing into his paws. He could be 225, 230 by the time he finishes school, I think, and still have that speed. I'm really fascinated with him.
Yeah, I should mention, by the way, I actually talked to Penn State head coach James Franklin today on the Ross Tucker football podcast, and we talked about Journey Brown, and he talked about his journey, where he's gone from kind of being a track guy to now being a football guy. So encourage you to listen to that or check it out at youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Speaking, by the way, of Penn State and Pennsylvania, the state where I reside, it happens to be one of the states where you can bet legally on the DraftKings Sportsbook app, which is awesome. It's the #1 rated sportsbook app for a reason, and they've got a return to baseball promotion going on right now that you're going to want to know about. Here's the deal. Before the baseball season starts, place a bet of at least $25 on who will be crowned the champion, and they'll give you a $25 free bet to use on opening day. Why not? Put $25 on the Phillies, of course, or wherever you want, and then they will give you a free $25. Download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code ROSS when you sign up. For a limited time, all new users can get a sign-up bonus up to $1,000. That's right. DraftKings Sportsbook has a sign-up bonus up to $1,000. Just enter code ROSS when you sign up, only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Disclaimer voice coming. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or PA only. Bonus comprised of a first deposit bonus and a first bet match, each up to $500. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. Let's get with it, Matt, as it relates to the next running back, Najee Harris. Now, let me tell you what I know about Najee. Okay, I called the U.S. Army Bowl when he was a senior, and he was the #1 ranked running back in the country, one of the top players in the country from California. Really, really impressive physically. I mean, in high school, his body, he looked like Steven Jackson. He was like 6'3", 230 in high school and just looked the part. It was interesting. He was a unique kid. When we interviewed him, it was a unique interaction. I don't know if he didn't like all the attention or the limelight, was unaccustomed to it or uncomfortable with it. So I didn't talk to him very long, but I can tell you, boy, he's one of those guys, almost like Nick Chubb. When I always say, Matt, how impressive Nick Chubb was physically, so was Najee Harris in a different way. Chubb was kind of short and just rocked up. Najee Harris had more of the Steven Jackson thing going. What do you think of the Alabama runner?
It's interesting because he's he's obviously that big back, really a collision runner, capable of doing that. But he also has good footwork and someone who can make multiple guys miss. He can layer moves. And in a way that Carlos Hyde early in his career for San Francisco showed a lot early on in his career. And while he's become a little bit more of a journeyman in his career, there's some things about his frame, his size, his footwork, the ability to kind of bounce outside and have that initial quickness that reminds me a lot of Hyde. The difference is that Najee Harris is a terrific receiver in a way that we haven't really seen from Hyde on that level. I mean, you watch Harris against LSU last year, and there's a play with Patrick Queen covering him up the sideline on a wheel route where Burrow throws it back shoulder, and he looks like a flanker out there, literally jumping back to the ball, high pointing it, dragging his feet and using one hand to ward off Queen after the catch and the other to snatch it and pull it in near the boundary as he drags his feet inside the cone for the touchdown. I mean, and this is out of a big guy that you don't expect to be able to do that. He doesn't have blazing speed. So the fact that he's just even with Patrick Queen was impressive enough. But he's a guy that's quick enough, I think, to get into the hole, to be able to avoid penetration. He can run over you. You better wrap him up and hit him when it comes time to have an interaction with him, or he's going to take you for a ride or just leave you on the ground. But I think he's a guy that, the biggest thing he has to work on, I think, is just, blocking. I mean, you're going to ask him to run the ball a lot, but if you want him to be a full-time guy, and he can certainly catch the ball well enough, when you need him to block, sometimes, misses some assignments. You see him drop his head a little bit too much in every block. If I were a coach at Alabama, I'd probably see if I could pull him aside and have about 3 different defensive players. And every time he gets ready for an interaction, I'd blow that whistle every time he drops his head. I would probably work on him just trying to keep his head up and see what he's hitting. If he can do that, I think he can be a really good back in the NFL. Maybe not a speedster, but certainly someone that can do a lot of good, dirty work for you.
The next guy, and this will be the end of Ross's row, if you will, of guys that I'm very familiar with. That is Jarrett Patterson from University of Buffalo. I did one of their games a couple years ago. They played Akron in 2018. That was his true freshman season. Boy, he was impressive. I mean, first of all, he's got a twin brother. He was starting at running back, or at least playing a lot. His twin brother, James, was starting at linebacker. And so they both were starting as true freshmen, which is very hard to do. And Jarrett just jumped out with his explosiveness, had over 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns as a true freshman. And then last year, he just went off. I mean, best season by a player in school history, 1,800 yards, 19 touchdowns, both school records. And so now he's going into his true junior year, and all he's done, Matt, is produce.
Yeah, man, he's a patient runner, and he's good inside and outside. He might be one of the more refined runners in this class already in terms of just vision processing, understanding his keys, different blocking schemes that he can work through. He's a pretty good short yardage player. He's built low to the ground. He's the type of guy, again, he's not a collision runner, but he understands pre-snap box counts and where to go when he has that freedom to pick a side or to be able to, kind of figure out immediately post-snap what's happening in terms of penetration and do something about it. Very quick and rangy with his lateral cuts, accelerates really well to the outside, and he's strong enough to work through wraps of bigger defenders and pull them forward, kind of like DeAndre Swift was able to do that. I think he bounces off hard hits pretty darn well with that low center of gravity. He kind of fits somewhere between a range between Giovanni Bernard and D'Angelo Williams for me. I mean, those are that's the neighborhood backs that he fits into talent-wise, dimension-wise. Can't wait to see more of him this year.
So this doesn't happen very often, Matt, but I guess that's what happens when you're recruiting as well as they are at Oklahoma. You actually have a couple of Oklahoma running backs on this list. I did an Oklahoma game last year against Houston, the opener. Trey Sermon and Kennedy Brooks. Which one of these guys do you like better, Matt, or do you think is the better prospect? I want to hear about both of them, but I'm curious as to which guy you think is better or the better prospect?
Well, Kennedy Brooks took over for Sermon, and kind of they were splitting time. And then now we got Sermon heading over to Ohio State, taking over for Master Teague, who has the Achilles tear. So with Brooks, it's interesting because he's a smooth runner. He breaks arm tackles, he pushes piles, but he's not a collision runner either. Kind of like Najee Harris, who's a collision runner. He's not that, but he has that starter speed and acceleration. He's got upside to develop. That vision between the tackles with a little more refinement to how he just kind of reads blocking schemes and gets his footwork together. His footwork's borderline excellent. He just has to understand what he sees well enough so that he can kind of link what his eyes and feet can do. He's an effective stand-up blocker who can work across formation efficiently, and I think he knows when to punch or hit his assignment based on the timing of the moment. But I got to tell you, I know that people like Kennedy Brooks better, and maybe I just need to see more of him. And I think that's probably going to be the case. But I really like Trey Sermon, and I just think he's a better prospect right now, and was kind of surprised that he kind of got usurped there. Maybe it's because he doesn't have the high end speed that Brooks has. And certainly in the college game, look, man, you get into that secondary and can go like that. You're going to get more opportunities like that in the college game. But listen, Trey Sermon's got that. He's got that size. He's an excellent blocker, picks up blitzes, all sorts of blitzes that, whether it's, linebackers coming in different directions with cross blitzes, or it's edge plays, coming from nickel blitzes or safety blitzes that are delayed. He's very good at being able to get tight in there and get eliminate the air between his chest and the defender and be able to drive that defender out and deliver the hit. And then as a runner, he's powerful. He's quick enough. He has that curvy linear movement, kind of like the ability to bend around like a motorcycle going through cones, and he can do that. He can weave through traffic, but he also has the cutting ability, terrific stiff arm. I mean, like he can plant that thing and not only be able to get good location on defensive backs and linebackers, but I've seen him do throw bys on pursuing defensive linemen, and be able to throw those guys by, like at Oklahoma State defensive linemen, and do that. I think at Ohio State, it's going to be a terrific fit for him and what he does well. And I think he's going to really raise his draft profile. And they were disappointed to lose him. I mean, Lincoln Riley wasn't exactly. He just said I think he got frustrated because he got hurt. He had a knee injury, and Kennedy Brooks took over, and he had really great 3 years here, and we're sad to see him go. And I think that this was just one of those opportunities for him that he could really raise his profile, because he's going to get a lot of touches with Master Teague dealing with that Achilles injury.
Yeah, you know what? I forgot that I just seen that a couple of weeks ago that Sermon had transferred to Ohio State as a grad transfer. Makes sense. Ohio State's pretty darn good. You get to play with Justin Fields. They lost J.K. Dobbins, so I get it. I understand. What about another Trey? Trey, is it Ragas?
I think so. Yeah, and
from
he's
Louisiana. You love. I feel like you love smaller school running backs like this.
I do, but what it is just that when you watch a guy like I did last year, and you see him against Alabama, and he's 5'10", 218. And he's just running through Alabama in a way that you don't expect from a guy at Louisiana. And he's taking it to them. He's just, with strength, contact balance, against indirect angles of pursuit, he bounces off guys. He can be a collision runner when he needs to be. I don't know about his long speed, but he has the acceleration, quickness, and power to be an NFL starter. And his decision-making and processing of blocks is also pretty strong. So if he can show a little more on passing downs, I think he can emerge as a promising NFL contributor or starter. I think his draft stock's going to go up this year.
Last guy I want to get your thoughts on is from Virginia Tech, and that is Khalil Herbert. Or I guess he was at Virginia. He was at
KU, and now he's at West Virginia.
Can't keep track of these guys.
Yeah. They jump around, but he's a 5'9", 205-pound speedster. I think he might actually be quicker than he is fast, but he can definitely get into the secondary and pull away, which just speaks a lot about his acceleration still. He had 3 years at Kansas, transferred to West Virginia this year, and And listen, he pulls through arm tackles. He bounces off those glancing shots. He has that momentum-generated power I've talked about with a lot of backs here. He's only fumbled once in 346 touches during his careers. He has really good decision-making, both with gap and zone schemes. And I'd like him even more if he didn't rely so much on jump stops and jump cuts, because you look at a guy like Kenyon Drake early in his career at Miami, and he relied on that stuff a lot. And what happens is you're inefficient when it comes to high traffic runs. And when you can be more efficient, keep your feet on the ground a little bit more, you can make changes of direction a little bit faster and maximize that acceleration that you have. And that's what Herbert has. So at his size, he's also a promising blocker, good usage with his hands, delivers a shot, has to learn to roll through his hips a little bit, but he's one of those players that I think could have a lot to gain with a strong season. And a lot to gain means going from maybe being an undrafted guy to being a fourth or fifth round guy.
Everybody listening has a lot to gain by getting the rookie scouting portfolio at mattwaldmanrsp.com. As a reminder, you can always check out Matt. He always looks awesome on the show on YouTube. We even got a YouTube comment, Matt, where somebody said, "You're right, Matt does look chill as blank." YouTube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. And as we said, make sure you check out what James Franklin had to say on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast as well today, because he talked about Journey Brown and Micah Parsons, who a lot of people talk about as a projected top 5 pick. Next week, we will get into the wide receivers with Matt. Really looking forward to that. There's a bunch of good ones again this year. Other than that, the keg is kicked. We are all tapped out.
Thanks for listening to the College Draft Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, Even Money, and The Business of Sports. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.